Just because you have an understanding of the Bible in your head doesn't necessarily mean that you have Jesus in your heart.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, got appetite. Everlasting water, never get thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey.
You are listening to Chad Schaefer on Disputed Lands.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Chad Schaefer. It's Monday night. It's Disputed Lands. Tonight, Ian the Duck Fiaducci is going to welcome our guest and bring him on screen here shortly. So, Ian, let her roll, brother.
Andrew Hoy. Tonight, I'm so excited for tonight. It was 3-4 months ago, Chad had kind of nudged me, gave me a little bit of the elbow and said, you know what, if there's some guests that you're excited or have in the back of your mind that you want to consider bringing on as guests, you've been doing this for a little bit, bring it to my attention. And so one of those names that I had mentioned more than once was Mr. Andrew Hoy. I came across this website through the reference of Rob Skiba in the beginning of 2017. And man, I got to tell you, before we get started here, I got to tell you, I was so impressed with your website. And that was before all the renovations that you've done now with all the neat little things you've got going on there. But I was just blown away. I mean, I spent, I don't know how long going over all the details you had on that website. And I just could not believe that such a truth had been hidden and yet now on your site so well put on display for the public to understand. So I'm very excited about having you on here tonight. I'm very excited about sharing this revelation that God has given you with the viewers and anybody else who they share it with. I think this is information that needs to get out there.
I appreciate it, Ian, and thank you, Ian and Chad, for having me on. I want to give a quick shout out to Randy P., who's helped me out quite a bit with my website here. And like you mentioned, it's been pretty heavily overhauled, and that was a long time in coming because I had a pretty stagnant website because I was busy doing other things, and the website never made the priority that it should have. And so anyway, I've finally, after a lot of time, it's the first beta of the Rev is rolled out, and I have, or I should say, we have further plans for it. A lot more in store, hopefully. So.
Well, I'm sure we'll get to those towards the end of the show there. We'll talk about a little bit about what you're planning on doing and stuff like that. But even before these renovations, that website I found was impressive. It's even cooler now. Anybody who was tagged in the Facebook post that we did has access to the link, and we will be bringing that up throughout the show as well, so they can go check out your website. So to start out tonight's conversation, the first thing that I wanted to bring to your attention for you to discuss for the viewer is how the illustrations of the tabernacle has influenced the public's perception thereof.
Oh, that's a pretty, I guess I have to try to pack this into as small of a space as I can here, but I guess Google image, I would say that. And this is where I began doing Google image search. I typed in tabernacle. When you type in tabernacle, what do you get? What do you see? You see all these images, and some of them are drawn with people who are at least interested in detail, and others are drawn by imaginative clowns, kind of, in a sense, because they pay no attention to any of the details given in the text. And really, there's a lot of it like that, and I guess people have handled the translation very poorly because it's been so poorly translated. And so people they get frustrated, they try to lay it all out, and they say, well, this doesn't make sense, and then detail A mismatches someone else's detail of the same thing, and it's because there's all this grave interpretation. This is in English, and a lot of the English, of course, is just built on King James or borrowed from King James. So that really it sinks images in the mind. This is the prohibition against what? Idolatry. And so when we get these bad images in our head, it's hard to shake them out.
Yeah, so before I got your book and got to dive into it, right? I grew up in the church, as they say, right? I was raised in a private school that was connected to the church, that was pastored by my mom's father. And I had no idea until reading your book that there was so many varying designs of the tabernacle. I mean, and you really laid it out in just the beginning of the book. You're going over all the different various designs and how they vary from whether you're talking about the roof or the posts or the shapes, the foundation, the elements. I mean, you're talking about give and take. They can't. None of them can agree. Andrew, I had no idea before your book, and you go through the multiple varying things, and then not only do you list out what changes from the variations of the designs, but you also debunk each and every inaccuracy while showing each and everything that they do. I mean, the book is phenomenal. I found it to be very thorough, but if it's okay, I'd like to discuss a little bit about those variances that I just listed a little bit about how there's, I mean, different roofing and different post counts and arrangements and things like that. I mean, I don't know about the viewer, but growing up, we saw, I hate to frustrate you, Andrew, but before reading your book and before coming across your website 3 years ago, I had one image in my head and I never bothered to count the posts. I never bothered to sit there and ask myself or ask anyone else for that matter, is this a functioning design? Anything of, does it work for what scripture tells us it was designed to do, right? I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands of questions you answer in your book, and I'm very impressed and I love it. But yeah, if you would speak a little bit about the variances and maybe, go into detail as you see fit.
Baruch Hashem, thank you. In the book, it becomes much easier once you start out with the right premise, and the whole round versus rectangular. Once that idea is in your head, I'll say that the structure wants to build itself. The texts are that specific, as you started to see. And I think a lot of people are just assuming I'm speculating, and I'm like, oh, I'm just being creative, and I'm taking a couple of latitudes with the text, and getting into the images. And there's three basic ways that they depict the tabernacle. One is kind of like an A-frame, and the other one's like a complete flat roof, and the other one's is kind of like a hybrid. Chad's got a few of those up. That picture Chad is showing right now is actually a model that is erected in Timnah, Israel. Now in 2016, I actually went to Israel to take a look at all their gear. That one that Chad is showing, that's actually German built, German design. And the Germans, if there's any design slogan they might have, it might be "When in doubt, make it stout." And I was talking to the tour guide, and they were explaining that they have, well, first of all, you can see there's these galvanized rails coming down from the center of it.
Oh, Andrew, I'm not hearing you. Chad, are you hearing him?
No, I've lost his mic.
Yeah, you cut out there for a second. Can you test again? I don't want to.
We can't hear you, Andrew.
What do you think, Chad? Should we boot him out and bring him back in?
Yeah, we can try doing that. Let me just kick him off the screen and bring him back in and see if that, or just mute and unmute him and see. Testing 1, 2, 3, Andrew.
No.
Let me kick him off the screen and bring him back in. Test. You may have to leave the studio and come back in, Andrew, or you accidentally disconnected your mic somehow.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. It might have unplugged.
Yeah, you might have unplugged it or something.
All right. Kevin was suggesting possibly trying to use the computer mic.
Yeah, I don't know if you have the computer mic, Andrew, in the Kim mic settings. Perhaps you could choose that and see if that.
The chat room says they're not going anywhere, by the way.
All right.
Oh,
there he is. All right.
Okay.
I didn't want you to keep going, and we wouldn't be able to hear you.
Okay, let me try to bounce back on that other one just one more time, because it's probably
You
gonna be
actually
clear.
sound better.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, you do. You sound a lot better.
Okay. That's disappointing. That is a better mic though, but this one is reasonable, so we're going to stick with it. All right. So as I was saying, the Timna model in Israel, it's a physical model where they supposedly build according to the Bible, and that's the one that Chad just showed, which is shown in a page in my book. And they have big galvanized beams propping the whole structure up into this. Like I said, it's like a hybrid A-frame. Now, that's not a bad business. Not a bad engineering practice to make like a triangular truss. But the problem is those elements that are there propping the thing up are never described in the book of Exodus. And so they've got this. It's a Hollywood prop for all practical purposes. It's part of a religious theme park. And
you know, Andrew, when you mentioned that, you say that very obviously. And when I read the requirements of what was being used to build the tabernacle, I remember asking myself, well, I don't remember seeing the beams or anything in there. I wonder how they knew to do that. They just must have information I don't. That was it was a cursory thought, but it was one that passed through my head and dismissed, but it was something that stuck in my craw, so to speak, to use an old term.
Sure. So this is, again, the German model. That was their approach. Israel actually has two full-size walk-in tabernacles. One is run by Jews, and the other one's run by Christians, more or less. And the one that's Christian, the Timna one, that's where they have these galvanized angular pieces giving it stability. And not only are those pieces there, but they burrow in anchors, I want to say 8 feet into the ground. 8 feet subterranean. Where are we given instruction to do anything like that? Where are we given hardware to do anything like that? And it goes back to this mindset: is the text divinely inspired? Is Moses just really sloppy in his records, or is "Thus saith the Lord" just kind of like, like is it something of that low a quality where he can't articulate himself? I mean, you've either got a God competency problem, a prophet competency problem, or an interpreter competency problem. And this is a human thing. We walked away from the Torah, and it says in Hosea 4, everyone likes to quote Hosea 4:6, and I should say 4:6a. For my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. But after that, there's no period. There's a comma, and it says, because they have forsaken the Torah, I will forsake them as priests. And we have forsaken the Torah. This is our whole culture. This is our whole American tradition, Christian tradition, and to a fair degree, also the Jewish tradition. I don't want to leave anyone out of it, but anyway, it's shameful that they think so little of such important divine writ. So,
I think a lot of that I think a lot of that is subconscious. Andrew, I think a lot of, like you had said before, and you so well articulated in your book. I gotta say it before we keep going. The writing in this book, the way you worded it, and the way you went about it, I mean, it shows that you put a lot of time and effort, and you really drive your points home clearly. Like, I am very thoroughly impressed with this book. I'm going to probably keep saying that, but I am. I'm extremely impressed with this book. But I mean, you talk about, and you're pointing at, like, they have the anchors, right? Which is not in the scriptures. We don't see that at all. And you talk about in the book why we would not see those in there, right? One of which being that it needs to be mobile, right? You need to be able to pick up and go. Right. I mean, but the fact that they put those anchors in there prove that the model that they have does not function without those anchors. Right. That was one of the points you had mentioned with just that part that made me go, wow. And it almost seems to me like they subconsciously are showing that they don't trust the scriptures without even realizing. I don't think they realize it, Andrew.
Well, and this gets into the how detailed this is. I've compared this many times to a combination of an engineering specification, which nobody likes to read either. Who wants to read all the instructions?
I think of the three of us in here, you're probably the most likely to like to read engineering specifications. Just my guess.
Every blessing is also a curse.
Right.
Every aptitude is another form of dysfunction. And
we're so thankful that you are built that way, brother.
I get hyper literal sometimes to the point where it aggravates people. I'll confess that. It's
no, but keep going on. So we're talking about the actual functions of the construction of the ones that are built. And you're saying that this immediately stood out to you.
Well,
what did you do, and where did you go from there? I mean, is it something that just drove you crazy, and so you moved along, or it drove you crazy enough that you thought, you know what, I can't move on from this until I rectify it?
No, I just went to Israel to validate my perception of their insanity, and also get harsh, heavy-duty Hebrew first language, Sabra, Israeli criticism, because I had spent a lot of time just actually it went pretty quick as far as how fast I was able to figure it out once I got pointed in the right direction. But there's a lot of the language nuance where I just don't have a command of the language. But then again, you can say the same for them, because if they had a command of the language, they would have figured this out or never lost it. And so there's this perception like, oh, what do you know? You're just a oblivious goy. And there's a little bit of that attitude, but actually Israelis are more open-minded than a lot of Americans or Christians are, because Christians basically, they want to trust a pastor and say, well, my pastor, what you're saying is interesting, but I'll have to see if my pastor, what my pastor says. It's like, well, did your pastor have they ever gone to any engineering classes or anything like this? This is some technical stuff. This is so going back into the technical specs before, it's like it's 6 chapters straight in this area of thus saith the Lord, and I compare it to a jumbo game of Simon Says. So if you're not going to listen to the first sentence, why listen to all the ones afterwards? And that's where they've lost it, and that's where they've gone wrong, and that's where they've tried to force fit things together where it just doesn't make sense, because they're trying to honor the scriptures in different places while having dismissed them in more important ones. I like to bring out the fact that there's more Bible text describing the curtains of this structure, this tent, this facility. Then there's instructions describing the Ark of the Covenant. So everyone understands that the Ark of the Covenant is like this holy, this is like double holy, Kiddush Kiddushin, this is the holiest thing that's in the Torah, where this is the center, this is where the divine presence is. And yet there's more text dedicated to the curtains. And that's the least amount of attention that anyone pays to it, because they just figure, well, the fabrics, we'll just slop them all together.
Yeah. The way you go about that in this book, man, I'm telling you, I don't know about the viewer, but I know that never came across my mind, right? And as Chad pointed out, out of the three of us, but especially between you and I am not an engineer by any means, Andrew. That is not my gift. That's not what God's called me to do. And you talked about how a lot of the information is missed and skipped over and dismissed and made to apply to this already preconceived notion, which often derives from what they're taught in their church or synagogue by their pastor or even in school, right? And without questioning it, because that's not what they weren't called to do, or if they did, they were dismissing it. But without all of that, you wouldn't have had this calling to do this ministry.
Right. If it hadn't been so wrong, there'd be no reason for me to come along and it would have been something else. But I'm really excited that you are called to do this. I think it's really a neat thing to be bringing to light, and I think that this truth is going to make a lot of people excited
looking at the scriptures, because I mean, this is one of those revelations, man. That, like, this is probably in my top 5 of one that just makes you go, whoa, I had something way wrong. But yeah, you talked about how they just threw those curtains on there, right? And they argue that it's basically decorative and has no purpose. And you go through this book showing, like, okay, first off, why would we just throw them on there? That doesn't even make any sense. But all the, I don't know if you want to go into the details on this or not, but all the issues.
I'll just sum up what you guys have just said in one thing that he wrote here that I underlined that impacted me the most about the information already given. If you have his book, and Andrew, by the way, there are many people already in our listening audience who have this book already. Okay. By the way, so they're enjoying the fact that they get to listen to the author talk about his book straight. the one who wrote it talk about it. So, but I'll read this statement from here. This is on page 20 for those of you guys who are out there. It says, apart from the previously discussed misappropriation of talent between artists, theologians, and builders, few full-size three-dimensional models of traditional tabernacle replicas are even attempted, given the expense and the manufacturing complexities involved. In fact, and this is a statement that really I underlined right here. In fact, of the pre-existing life-size tabernacle models constructed, not a single one has been built literally according to the ancient Exodus specifications. I mean, if there's a statement that's going to be put in bold in any of the book up to this point, this is the one I think that should jump off the page to anybody who's been reading so far, who may be trying to consider what your point is, which I got it because I knew coming into it. But when I read that really drove the nail home for me.
Well, I guess I'd forgotten that I'd written those exact words.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah. The point stands nonetheless, and it gets into this literal, we get into the idea of doing the Torah, and if we can't do it, we don't understand it. If we don't try to do it, you can read these things at a cursory level, but until you engage them experientially, where are you? You just don't know a lot of things, because there's a lot of this detail. It's like, well, how do we do with this? Well, I don't know. I never thought of that. And there's so much that we learn that experientially. And this is to Ian's point previously. This is part of my hope in that I want this to be the wake up call of wake up calls. And I think this is getting into this idea of why is it revealed, at a time such as this. Ian is bringing up the fact that this is something he's one of his favorite revelations. I'm of the opinion it has to be my favorite, I guess, but really I think this is a bigger revelation than all the stuff found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because this clarifies things. This illustrates things. It models things. There's so many different layers of this. Actually, the guy who built it, his name is Betzalel. That was Moses' chief engineer architect. And Betzal in Hebrew means onion, and Betzalel is literally God's onion. And so you have an onion is what? It's a multi-layered thing, kind of cropping out of the ground. How they grow in a dome, and this is even seems to be in a very similar proportion to an onion cropping out of the ground. And the wake-up call to the religious communities, be they Christian or Jewish, the notion that, hey, maybe you need to take another look at the text. Maybe you don't understand everything that you thought you did. And this, to me, practically exceeds its merit in its own revelation. The fact that it's underscoring to all these experts that there's a lot more there than what you've been traditionally taught.
Right. And that's one of the things is, not only does it push the reader to be excited to get back into the scriptures and look at things that they hadn't considered, right? And they get to look at those long lists of materials with new, fresh eyes and say, wow, there's actually meaning to this. And I mean, and you really bring that alive to anybody who doesn't have the book, they definitely need to look into buying your book. What was I going to say? Oh, two things. Number one, I was going to say, Chad was actually just interviewing, was it Jim Barfield? Did I get that name right, Chad? Is it Jim Barfield?
Yeah.
Are you listening?
Yep.
Are you there? Okay. He's doing things. Okay. That does it's the Copper Scroll, right? The Copper Scroll project. And in that interview, he mentions about mapping out the location for where this is supposed to be hidden. So I think it's a very interesting time for you to come out with this and for this to get pushed, because if that does come to light, you're going to be able to say, hey, look, I tried to tell you, you know. But, you know, okay, so back in 2017, when I first started looking into this, because Skiba mentioned it, I was like, well, now I got to go look at this. And I started looking into your website. The first thing that caught my attention, okay, and I don't know how far you want to go into this, but just simply stating this, one of the things that really hit me, and this is when your website was more simplistic, right, was stating that just the practical functions of what was, not just the structure itself, right, because there's a lot to the architecture and the structure that when it comes to environmental elements like the wind, rain, and sun, right, those were the three that really stuck out to me, that the other designs do not hold water. They do not hold up to scrutiny, and we can go into that a little bit if you'd like to, because I think the viewers need to hear it, especially if they're not familiar with your stuff. The activities that were going on inside the tabernacle, I mean, these designs, the popular designs that are taught in colleges, in Sunday school, in churches, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but they can't even perform those sacrifices, right? They didn't have enough room for the congregation in there, right?
Well, I guess gets into there's a number of possible opinions or interpretations on who's all coming inside, how many people are coming in. And if you look at it from a square footage standpoint, I think the square footage argument is one of the more compelling. If you look at the amount of footprint, the amount of area that the building occupies, and the way that they've interpreted the deals with the wood, they're basically assuming two-dimensional beams. Now, how do you have a two-dimensional wood beam? It's kind of like a wall panel type thing, right? Well, if it's just a thin wall panel, it has no real structural stability, and most of them assume that these beams are 10 cubits tall, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit thick. Well, there's varying opinions on the thickness, but there's in the Hebrew there's the vav, getting into the idea of joining things together. And some people think that it's 1.5. It's 10 by 1.5. And I'm saying no, it's 10 by 1 by 1/2. And that's the three dimensions that are given. You know, that's one Hebrew particular. Now in English, they probably have it so that it comes out. And I'd have to take a look at this again. But this is what they do in the models: is they make it so it's 10 by 1.5. If that's the width, so now we're widening the beams so that they can make their full width, full length unit, right? So this is done, this misinterpretation, for them to make more sense of the curtains. Now, when we go back to the weight per square foot, when you go camping, are you looking to bring lumber? Do you bring 2x4s along? No. You're getting these thin poles, dainty stuff, portable stuff. So they end up with wood beams that are 3 times heavier than what's presented in my model. Okay. Now my model would still work if you oversize the beams. I shouldn't say my model. I should say the Exodus model, the proper model, the round Hebrew model. That still works if you widen out the beams. But theirs is 3 times heavier. So you're looking at 150 tons, as I recall, or 150,000 pounds. I'd have to double check on that. 150,000 pounds of lumber. So you're lugging all this lumber through the wilderness, up and down hills and rocks, and through sand and this and that, only to build this super compact structure, and have all these boards standing on end. It makes no sense whatsoever. So getting into the amount of space on a per pound basis, per square foot, I would be willing to bet that this is among the heaviest, except for the Giza pyramid, one of the heaviest structures per square foot in all human history, the way that they have it presented.
That has to be moved around too.
Right. So getting into this workability. So let's talk other logistics. So what does it say when you're bringing animals to sacrifice? You bring them where? To the entrance of the tent of meeting. And this is where you're doing your slaughter. Well, where do they put their altar? They put their altar smack dab in the middle of the courtyard. So what would that mean? If you're doing sacrifice, do you sacrifice the animal out in the courtyard, outside of the courtyard at that entrance, or are you coming to the entrance of that little shoebox tabernacle to do the slaughter there? Let's suppose that they're bringing it inside that courtyard. Now that courtyard is going to turn into a combination of pasture land, and it's going to be a big manure field. So the way that they're envisioning the house of the Almighty is in a manure field. How embarrassing is that?
Yeah.
And then getting into the slaughter. If they're slaughtering everywhere, all inside this whole thing, you got a big bloody mess. This is, and if you're doing it right at the entrance of the tent of meeting, they usually show the water laver several feet away from it. So if you're going to do your slaughter right next to the entrance of the shoebox, and then you have to go wash your hands and feet before you go inside. Well, it's like putting the welcome mat to your house, your front door, out on the street in a muddy pit. To wipe your, it'll say wipe your shoes here out on the street, and between there and your front door, now you have a whole bunch of defiled ground to walk into. Would you want to be bringing that into your house?
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you've got some valid points here. I mean, this is supposed to be a place of holiness. This is supposed to be a place of worship, and just the mention of being clean spiritually and physically before entering, just to have that issue. I mean, you're bringing up all kinds of valid points. I like how you mentioned shoebox though, because I mean, it took me about a week of going through your website to really make sure, because like in 2017, like I read just a couple paragraphs and I was like, oh snap, this guy's onto something. But I had to test it out, right? I'm not one to just accept it right away, so I got to go through it, and I'm not an engineer guy. So your website, when I first went through it 3 years ago, when all the numbers and everything, I was really confused. So I was happy that you had these images and stuff, because I was like, man, without this, I'd be completely lost. Which, I got to tell you, the book is so helpful with that. I was really surprised when you sent this to me, man. I was like, man, this is going to go over my head. I'm going to look like an idiot in this conversation. All I know is that I agree and I believe it. But no, you made it so that even somebody like me can understand it. But that was one of the things I was trying to mention, was when I talk about this bringing the scriptures to life, and to bring the reader to be excited to go back through the scriptures. And I think it's so cool to go to the parts that people often dismiss and find boring. One of the things that does that is your demand, your shout for consideration of practicality. You're saying, look, when you read about this, don't just imagine that this is a place of worship, but look at what they're doing and consider all the work that you go in. I mean, you had this line in here. I didn't do what Chad did, and I should have written down in my notes page numbers and paragraph numbers and things like that. But you talked about having no trial error building possibilities. They could not do a trial by error building. They could not build some and go, okay, this doesn't work. And obviously that's not the picture that the scriptures paint us. But when you start to look at all these designs and the variances and you start to show how they don't work out, it's almost like they had that mindset that the Israelites were just trying to figure it out as they go. And you start talking about the practicality of that. I mean, okay, I don't want to get too worked up here. I'm just saying that, that's one of the things I want the listener and the viewer to really consider here, is the practicality that comes with this topic. What was going on in there? I mean, you talk about building it, being able to mobilize it. You've got the animals, the cutting down of the wood. Andrew, I was going through your book and I didn't even think about how much wood they have to go gather and cut down until I read it in your book. While I'm reading your book and I'm thinking all these things, I'm still like, wow, I had never even considered that.
One of my favorite when it comes to practicality is just dealing with the raw numbers, and some of the raw numbers, like in the the courtyard. Everyone loves to tell me from looking at Exodus 27, you mentioned how you went back and tested this. You say, I'm not going to just believe it just because somebody says it. And I'll have to admit, if somebody came up to me, stranger, no matter their credential or whatever, said, hey, guess what? The tabernacle's round. You'd be like, yeah, all right, well, whatever. The first reaction is dismiss. And if you're a little bit more intellectually curious, it's like, oh, really? It's like, so you're saying that, 20 billion people over the course of history or whatever, missed this point, or maybe not 20 billion, but 10 billion or what have you. They just completely missed it, and they're all wrong, and you're right. And it's like, yeah, that's a pretty outrageous claim. It's a really outrageous claim. And I guess getting into the practicality side of this, one of my favorite things was, looking at the curtains, I got to thinking about this. And what you'll see, and I dedicate part of chapter 4 to this, is how do they build a rectangular curtain set on the courtyard, or their posts, getting into the post allotment. So if it says there's 20 posts to the south and 10 to the west and 20 to the north and 10 to the east, actually it doesn't say there's 10 to the east, but if you got 10 on the west, now does that mean that the westmost post on the south side is part of the south string of courtyard or of posts in the count, or do you add another one? So now the text is, you're either going to be cheating the language to make the math work, or cheating the math to make the language work, right? So if there's 20 posts and there's 20 in between, most people say, well, the courtyard, or the whole courtyard is 100 cubits long. And okay, if the courtyard's 100 cubits long and there are 20 posts, well, that's not represented as 5 cubits per post. That if you take 100 divided by 20, yeah, you get 5. But the thing is 20 posts doesn't make 20 intervals. It makes 19 intervals. And so if you can imagine doing your measurements with fractions, I mean, who here loves fractions? You have the idea of a 19th. Could you imagine measuring out something to the 19th? I mean, how do you can divide a piece of string up into 19 parts. You can do things by folding and stuff, but it's like, but would you? And this is like one of the many examples of where they say, well, it really doesn't matter that much. It's like, yes, it was very exacting, and it all had purpose.
Right. And that's often the case with big revelations of truth like this, is that it's often misunderstood, not well comprehended or even researched. And true revelations like this, they're given by God, right? The scripture tells us that every good gift comes from the Father. So when it comes to individuals like you, Andrew, that receive this huge thing that gets to share it with the body, and the body discerns it as being true, I can't help but give credit to God for giving that information to you, that revelation. And it just so often goes against the grain, right? Isn't that typically how these things go? And it also kind of makes fools of the wise and makes wise out of the fools, right? In the sense of simple and prudent, right?
Sure.
I'm sorry, you look like you're about to say something.
Maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very excited to have you on here tonight. I mean, there's so many things I wanted to go over. I wrote down a lot of notes of what I felt a viewer coming in watching this that has no idea about you or this topic, right? Because a lot of people in the chat right now have the book, but some of them might not. And I'm sure viewers who watch this later aren't familiar whatsoever. They don't know who you are. They don't have your book. So I wanted to bring up, you talked about the draping of the roof and the A-frame and the different posts and stuff, which, by the way, when you're talking about the 19th fractions, this is kind of how they ended out having that open space, right, where they had to add to the materials.
I'm sorry, I was you're saying adding to the materials. I missed the half sentence before that.
Well, when I first looked at your stuff in 2017, that was one of the other things that really got me, is when you start laying out how all these designs, they have to add to the materials to even enclose the courtyard on the way that they have it, right? Am I getting that right? I didn't get that wrong, right?
Sure. Yeah, they get confused. They do add an extra curtain set in entirely as well, and it's because this Simon Says factor. Is it thus saith the Lord this, or thus saith the Lord this and that? And they're erring on the wrong side of the this and that. They're assuming there's an and that there when there really isn't, in so many words.
But these kind of mistakes wouldn't be made if they weren't trying to force it to apply to their preconceived notion. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is that they already have this notion in their mind and they're trying to make it fit. And then when it doesn't fit, they add on an extra curtain. They put anchors under the ground so that the thing doesn't blow over when you come to visit it, right? I mean, in your book and in your website, you talked about how these designs, they would not withhold any of the situations that are going on in the wilderness, right? With the wind, it's going to knock them over, right? Or it's going to be too heavy to move.
I met a guy in Israel who had a very, very small model built, and he was explaining how difficult it was to cut, because they used like these big silver braces at the bottom of the posts, and they call them sockets, and there's really no good translation justification for that, and this is where I have to on occasion go to battle with translators and literally dictionary entries, because the dictionary entry is it's inferred from the context of the tabernacle. This is how they getting in the case of this usage, edne kesef, the silver, I refer to as a silver lord or a silver judge or balance. This is something that they're acknowledging. This is like, well, this is awkward. If you can imagine, first of all, taking a silver and looking at casting. Okay, so I worked in a foundry back in college, and actually had in high school I did castings, and in college I guess we did that too. But I actually worked in a foundry where they're pouring molten metal and everything. And so this is a silver block that they model is super huge. Maybe I'll let me just pop over into this screen thing here. And I'll give you a little visual on this.
Man, that's too cool.
And
we can see it
here. Anyway, this big block that they have modeled is part of their standard. There we go. This big block, you can see how bizarre that is as far as a shape. Now, when you cast something like that, you get inclusions. You get it shrinks in such a way where it's really hard to make a square hole, I guess is part of the point. And so they got these giant blocks. And so this guy had actually this little desktop model. When I say desktop, it was probably about I don't know, about 4 feet or 3 feet in length or something like that. And he said that he was setting it up for in a bar mitzvah, and on a hilltop in Israel. And he said that the wind blew it over. So it's that sort of reality check that's again, that's experiential learning for you. So
Chad, you almost look like you had something to say there.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say we're quickly moving through time, Andrew, and I want to make sure that we get to all the points that you wanted to make during the interview. We've already been going for 45 minutes, believe it or not. So one of the points that I wanted to get to is that you had your model going, which was showing on the screen there in the background, your active model, which if people will go to the website, we put it in the chat and it's been scrolling across the screen. You can see a presentation yourself on his website, probably much cleaner than you can on your screen. So I encourage you to just simply go to the website and view the animation that's right at the top of your screen when you get there. So if you do view that and you can see the tabernacle model, we've been spending time explaining why the model that all exists today everywhere simply are fallacies. They're simply fallacies. They're imaginations. So that's the point. So what Andrew is showing you is using the math that he has come up with, and hence the Project 314, right? This reference to pi, which he discusses in the book. You can see that the tabernacle design that Andrew has developed using simply the information is there it's more logical in every way fathomable for a people group who are making a tabernacle that can both be quickly raised up. When I say quickly, I'm talking in reference in terms of any construction this size that would be mobile, that you could take around. So that's don't use quickly as in like you're going to run out to the store and come back again. No, I mean, it still took a little bit of time, but for something of this size to be able to be broken down, rolled, put together, tied to animals to be carried to wherever is the next place that we go. And those of you familiar with the story know that they went to some 40 different cities those 40 years. Right? As they traveled the wilderness, the scriptures name it, that they went to the different cities. They just didn't go out in the middle of some hole and camp. They traveled around during the 40 years of those Exodus. That means that tabernacle had to be torn down and re-erected wherever they went. And when we're talking about the complexity of constructing the modern versions of these, which is what Andrew's been outlining, it's just one of those things that make you go, this is a joke. This is one of those things that make people who come to the Bible later in life, who have engineering degrees like Andrew does, and they read that and they go, and they look at what they've constructed and they go, the Bible's a book of fairy tales, right? This is why people are so dissuaded with things like this. What I admire from Andrew doing this is not only his attention to detail that God has created him in, but by being faithful to the text in trying to understand what the Bible wrote and then seeing that put together to come up with the model that he presents in his website. So I know I kind of spoke out there a little bit, Andrew, but I'm just kind of summing up from my own perspective what I appreciate, see, and enjoy so much about this. You know, I sent you a copy of my book too, and it was not the same topic, but it was in essence kind of the same mindset and approach that you took with your book as I did with mine. I looked at history and what took place, what happened, and then simply compared that to scripture and let the scriptures say what they said, believing what they said was true, and looked at that and said, look, this is what happened. This is what took place. How can it be anything other than what the Bible says? Now, if I'm not understanding it just means that not that the Bible is incorrect, but it must mean that my understanding of what the scripture is saying is incorrect. And that, should be the premise we start with anytime we come to the scripture and it seems confusing or out of place or something's not setting right with us. The first response always ought to be, there's something wrong with the way I'm thinking about this or the way I'm looking at this, or maybe possibly the translation that I'm reading in could be a problem. Maybe whoever translated this got something a little bit wrong that's just not quite sitting as good with the original Hebrew as it should. So I appreciate that. The round tabernacle model, I'm going to say one more thing here, Andrew. I'll shut up and I'll let Ian, the duck here, continue on going where you want to talk about, because there's several points here that we still want to make. And I'm going to name those off so you guys can stay on track, though. You have a little bullet point. You can go and look and see about Andrew's journey on getting to this. That's available. If you go to his website, you're going to see different sections there below the thing in the about area, as Andrew calls it. Click on those and click on those. Look at that information. As Andrew said, with everything that's going on in the world, he believes, I believe, there's a reason why this information has come to light today, why the Father has chosen Andrew and created him in such a way to bring this to light. And we want to be encouraged by this. If we're serious Bible students, we ought to take serious attention to these things. If our Father wanted us to know about this, he created Andrew in this time, in this place to bring this out, then the Father wants us to know this, and we owe it to our Father, not to Andrew or anybody else. We owe it to our Father to know why he's doing that. There could be a very good reason for that. So the legitimacy of this project, you can see his journey. You guys can talk about here there's a calendar of events. One of the things, Andrew, I want to make sure that we don't forget before this show is done tonight. So bookmark this in your mind. The model we discussed beforehand, before coming on air. Please do mention that before we're done with this interview. One last thing, Andrew, I know you read my book, as you said before, but I want to do a screen share here too of something that was what Doug Krieger and I came up with here. When we read the instructions of the creation of the, let me do this here and let me just kick us off the screen.
Interesting.
Yeah, it just fits much more supremely in the model that you've created when we take the explanation of how it was fashioned in the book of Revelation. I thought that so intriguing that what we see agreed so securely with what you have done. And I'll shut up now.
Hey, Chad, that little thing that thing you just showed, Andrew, I don't know about everybody in the chat room, but I am not the only one that didn't hear any of that. Just so you know.
Oh, wow. What I was saying is
we get to see the image.
That image that we put in there fits so much more supremely into your model, and I use not your model, the scriptural model of the tabernacle as it's described, versus any of the models too. When we first looked at this, it seemed this seems out of place in a box.
Yeah.
However, it makes much more sense in a circular, pie-inspired, holy, sacred cubit-inspired area versus a box.
Sure.
And it's just feels better. And I'll let you, I'll let you guys continue, but please do mention those things that I mentioned. We're going through time quickly.
So
I know it.
We have an hour and 5 left. Is that correct? Is that we have 5 minutes left, or an hour and 5 minutes left?
We'll try to go through as much as we can. We typically only go for about an hour, but I don't want to cut this short. I want to make sure, Andrew, that you get to say everything that you wanted to touch on. So don't feel rushed. But let's be concise, is all I'm saying.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I wanted to make sure he went into the model and his upcoming stuff with the calendar and events and things like that and some projects he planned on. There was only two things that I wanted to bring up that I felt that a newbie to the topic might find interesting, and that it's simple enough, and it's I mean, there's so many details you go through, Andrew. I mean, you really take God out of the box with this. I mean, just placing it down that you're going from a small, simple rectangle thing that does not fit at all, does not work, it's illogical, it's impractical, it doesn't hold water, it doesn't hold the scrutiny, and you show it time and time and time again. As somebody in the chat room mentioned, even with colorful little tabs that talk about this worked, this did not work, this needs rework, and this is why. I mean, it was really cool how you did that. But the two things I wanted to have you touch on just a little bit, because I thought they were cool and simple enough, is how rain and sun connected with the topic of like the leather coverings, why that would be important as to why we don't have just the draping of the curtains and the leather just laid out as they suggest in normal designs. That was one of the two things.
Well, I guess getting into the use of leather as a covering and use of the other curtains, again, the traditional model assumes all four of those things are layered up. And even though the text talks about how some of the fabrics are over or around the side of the tabernacle, or the sides, I should say, plural, and this is like one of these big functional things. So function. There's linen, there's wool, and there's different leather. There's two different types of leather that are called out. Most people, they get to this part of the Bible and they start yawning the same way they deal with genealogies, right? And getting into the purposes of the leather, one is described as reddened leather, and the other one is the upper one. And there's Hebrew that most translators don't really understand, which I believe is referring to like a translucent leather, or more something that's passing light, more opaque or whatever. That is allowing light into the center. So you have, in a sense, a skylight, getting into, again, the function. So if you're stacking all those things and you're not having good pitch, then you'll have water collecting, you'll have it seeping through, stuff getting, rotting and everything. You want to have air on the flip side so that if it is moist, it can blow dry real easy. And a yurt, the way that a yurt works, you end up having the heating, the sides are heated and everything like that, and it kind of makes a chimney effect. It has a draw, it pulls out so it's a naturally aspirated, naturally ventilated type thing. And I guess I hope that answers the question on the covering and everything. So.
Yeah, it does. Again, one of the things I really wanted to hammer in for the viewer, especially those who are new to this topic, is practicality. I mean, one of the main things about this book, I mean, yes, you're proving that the scriptures mean what they say, and you're proving what they actually say about this topic, and that is really cool. And I'm not trying to downplay that at all, because it is very important. And just the fact that, what is truth about any certain topic, and especially if the scripture makes a big deal out of it, like you said, it's mentioned more than the ark. Obviously, it's emphasized for a reason. But just the simple fact of what is truth, I mean, of course that matters, at least to somebody who cares about truth. Anybody who claims to be a believer should be caring about these type of things.
Well, there's been such getting into the mishandling of the scriptures. We can't even call it that, because really we're not dealing with scriptures, we're dealing with translations. And within our culture, within our religious institutions, they treat King James like it's scripture. I don't treat King James like it's scripture. I see it as offensive. And I see it as offensive because I've started looking at the Hebrew. And every time that I do this, there are so many more layers of the Hebrew. So if you're happy with 2/10 of a Bible revelation, go ahead, keep reading the King Jimmy. I'm sure, have at it. Another point to what Chad was talking about a little bit is there are people who've been estranged from religious institutions because sometimes they're silly ideas that are being put forth. And so if you have either silly ideas or offensive people or knuckleheads, people with intellect who try challenging these things, and then they come up blank in a response. I mean, no wonder why there's a mass exodus in the churches. So this is one of the things that I find interesting, exciting, is getting people's perception of what's there in the scriptures again, and not only that, but reteaching the religious communities of what the scriptures really are, and they're Hebrew, and they're not English. This is the original. This is the real McCoy, so to speak.
If you don't mind touching on just a little bit about the blue loop, because this sounds like something, when first going into it, I didn't think that this would be a detail that would really catch my attention, but that was one of my favorite things that you went into, was the blue loops.
Yeah, the blue loop. So you got tricolored curtains, and there's two principal sets that are introduced in Exodus. And the first set, there's a set of 10, and the second set, there's a set of 11. And the first set of 10 measures 28 cubits. The second set of 11 measures 30. Well, the second set is the one where I found the pi constant, and this is what got me into this. So Chad brought that up kind of vaguely before, in that how did I get into looking at all these different things on so I went into Google only because I started studying the curtains. I didn't study the curtains because I wanted to study the tabernacle. I studied the curtains because I was doing a different word study, and I had my curiosity was piqued on it. I'm not like, hey, I'm going to go and redesign a tabernacle, or I'm going to interpret it the same way that they did, or whatever. I just had some questions, and I started pulling on this thread, and I couldn't let go. So this is getting into that sequence. So this first set of curtains, Exodus 26:1 and through verse 6, is the first set, and these are referred to as the Mishkan. This is the dwelling place. The dwelling place is being established within these 10 curtains. So with that, those curtains are multicolored, and they have describes as loops. Okay, so you're supposed to link the loops together. Now, I think it's interesting that on one hand you've got a red and a purple and a scarlet, basically. Or I'm sorry, and blue. So what do we have? We see the sky is blue. We see the earth is red. In between heaven and earth, then we have what? We have royalty. So royalty is a mixture of purple and blue. And with the blue ones in the heavens, they're the ones that are holding things together. And with the blue loops, they're performing more or less a cable-like function. And I actually have a presentation on this, and I'm meaning to video record it, get the recording out in the market and everything. But the word cable, Kabbalah. Okay, so now I'm going to be labeled a Kabbalist because I'm saying, it's mikbalot. So it's from kabel, and this is where we get our English word cable from. And so it's the idea of receiving. And so it talks about the blue loops receiving the loops. And so these loops, one interacts with the next, so that one is receiving the next. Let me get a little, a couple of chords here. So how do you get two loops to join together? You can watch the magicians and play all these tricks, right? But it occurred to me that these blue loops, and actually Exodus 26:1 describes these curtains as a cunning work. They're often it's ma'asah chashav, and normally that's oftentimes it's translated as an artistic work, work of an artisan, of a craftsman. And I guess getting into the as far as how this is all getting linked together, if you have two loops where one is receiving the next, the thing you need in between there is a pole. And now I can get the loops functioning again as cables, as the text is alluding to. And so they are performing a function, and they are performing an engineered function, and they are a cunning work, because it took me several weeks to figure out the exactness on some of the subdimensions on how they would have to be in order to work. Just because, again, going at this from the first go around, but they are actually structural elements in the tent. So everything having purpose.
Always everything having purpose when it comes to this, right? When it comes to the instructions of God and God's ways and things of that matter. Sure. One of the many reasons why this book and this project and this ministry of yours is just so neat, exciting, amazing, and vital. Okay, so I'm going to take one of my famous latrine breaks that our listeners have now become accustomed to. But if you would talk with Chad a little bit about the goals that you have set forth, the up and coming stuff, and I saw you're doing something with Zen Garcia coming up soon, right? And some stuff like that. And then if you want to talk about the models as well while I'm gone.
Sure. I guess first I'll just jump into calendar stuff. I've got this is one of 4 different interviews within this here week. I have one with Zen Garcia coming up on Thursday. Truth, I think that's with Truth Frequency Radio. I have one with Derek Gilbert, who's got View from the Bunker. That's the name of his website that has this featured. And I have he's also with Skywatch TV, so I don't think it's airing on the Skywatch channel or anything, but that's who Derek is anyway. If those are not familiar with, he's big into a lot of prophecy and current events and everything. And he and his wife, they've authored books and so forth. And then also Avi Ben Mordechai. Avi is he had spent some time in Israel, living as an Orthodox Jew. He is now living in Australia and been doing a podcast for many years. So Avi's content is a 2-part, starting to air this here Saturday, and again Derek's is this Sunday. So again, that's on my calendar of events. I'm hoping to have a video conferencing go on. I've recently launched a Patreon channel or Patreon account, and I'm for Patreons. I'm trying to do kind of up close, personal, talking about all this stuff because there's so many layers to it. Let's see, and with
that's actually a good segue, Andrew. I didn't mean to cut you off. Your folks, again, I'm just going to tell people, recommend, go to his website, the calendar of events and other interviews, because if you're like me, Andrew, different interviewers going to ask questions that they have, and you're going to hear different thoughts directly from the author on the book that he's written here regarding this topic. So just because you've heard this interview doesn't mean you're going to get the book means you automatically see everything. You get the book and you hear the author, and the different interviewers will ask questions that trigger different thoughts that Andrew had while writing the book, or the thought process he went through and wrote what he wrote. And those are just as valuable as getting the book itself, which you should do. So that brings me a great segue to the next portion here that I wanted you to get into, Andrew, and that is getting involved. How can people personally get involved in helping you with this project? You have many ways. Please take a little bit of time to explain all the different ways that people can help and get involved.
Sure. So let me back up to the Patreon real quick. So with the Patreon, I have sort of perks, package deal type things. Here I'm into shameless self-promotion. This is my the first book that I'm publishing, The House of El Shaddai. This is the one that Chad and Ian have been talking about. And this is a hardcover edition. I, of course, have got a soft cover edition. These actually are very, very durable. As far as take a licking and keep on ticking. I've got a workbook available on Amazon. This is a sample version. There's like 200 questions, and this one, it doesn't have pictures, and it's designed to help people get around the translation glitches and come to grapple with and identify this for themselves, so that they can experientially process this in their heads. That workbook is actually available on PDF on this, which is my PowerPoint edition of basically it's the book on PowerPoint. So you can use it as a study tool, self-study tool. It has an abbreviated Hebrew lexicon, and it also has that workbook in it. And so this is available on my website and Amazon, I think, as well right now. This is a book I've been working on called Exploring God's House. This is something I'm still in need of editing on, and getting someone who's between editing. This is something else that's I'm working with a Jewish person from Canada who's interested in getting this published in Israel. This is a very different book in that it's for Hebrew roots-friendly people. The first book I showed you has 0 Hebrew in it, just about. I'm basically explaining what the Hebrew, where it's going, and I figured I didn't want to intimidate a normal, Christian audience or what have you. This is showing everything on kind of a verse-by-verse basis. The other one is presented more in a narrative style. And this, I'm basically breaking up every single verse, comparing it to your King Jimmy, and giving you the pluses and the minuses of how and why it is the way it is. This book at the back of it has King James original, the 1611 content, I think that is, and Leningrad Masoretic text. Then I've got an abbreviated Strong's section in this. So this one I need help editing on technically. So you want to talk about getting involved in sponsoring stuff like editing. This is something that, if having the time of the day, there's another thing on my website. You'll see I've got models under development, physical models that one can put together desktop, or, it's good for a Sabbath group or a study group, a church group, Hebrew school group, and I'm basically taking all those elements that are described in the book, that are described in Exodus, and I'm actually building a model, a physical model with these things. With, it's a lot of parts. It's about 450 parts or so that model is, and I'm working on kind of a first generation packaging of it. So getting, and this is about a 1/50th scale. So we'll just say roughly 50 inches, almost 4 feet in diameter, or a little over 4 feet in diameter. So it's designed so even kids could put it together. Ian mentioned before how with the diagrams, my book has over 200 diagrams in the one that Ian has, and this is this kit that I'm developing is designed where you could have a 10-year-old put it together, based on the pictures and based on all that. So that's mentioned on the website. Chad was mentioning the journey. So some people are wondering, where's this whole thing going? Where's this project going? And actually, my father used to say that. He used to say, tell someone where they've been, and I tell you where they're going. And so I've been engaged in a number of different levels. I've got a 22-foot physical model I made out of wood and aluminum, and I haven't shared all that. I've got a bunch of video. I'm probably going to put that on my Patreon as well. But getting into assistances and services, getting people who are experienced in video editing, would be a real plus. So I can start producing more video. I've got someone who's helping me, sponsoring a little bit of modeling, but I still have got to find a better, when I say a better, available Blender artist. The last one I had, he's not available right now, so I have to find another, freelance type person or volunteer type person, being better. I'd like to put this into VR, virtual reality. I mean, I have so many different dreams, visions, convictions on this. I want to build a full scale, but before that, I want to build a smaller scale, something that's big enough for a walk-in. My 22-foot model is such that you can fit a small group of people in it, but you're ducking under parts and pieces of it, and obviously with the leather coming down and all that, I don't have the leather all finished out. But the model, that model was a proof of concept. So in my website, I get into talking about all these different stages I've gone through in the over the course of product development and project development. And I do have a number of other presentations that I want to get again available on my website and in the store. Yeah, VR would be helpful, and I agree. There's some of the shoebox ones have the walk-in models of this. So let's see. I have on my website areas where third-party people can submit articles. This is the 10th, the Ohel Moed, and Moed is Moed related to the Moedim, the feasts. And I've got a little meme showing, why does Leviticus 23 come before Exodus 26? And that point is that people are fixated on moon spottings and barley and calendar counting and equinoxes and heavenlies and there's all that focus on that from one chapter, in a few blurbs. This is mentioned 50 chapters of the Bible. The tabernacle is the Ohel Moed. So everyone's concerned about keeping the feasts. Well, for an appointment, we need people, a place, and a time. What don't we have right now? Do we have we have the people, and we're arguing over time. But what about the place? You know what? And Chad, we were touching on this a little bit before. It bothers me that Burning Man. If you look at what the pagans are doing for and in and with Burning Man, and you compare it to what Torah pursuant believers and Bible thumpers are doing for feasts, in a sense we're losing the culture war. And I think that building a large enough model, this is testimony. Why build a model? Why? Because this is part of correcting the record. This notion that our God is not incompetent, and this testimony. I mean, the LDS people of in Salt Lake City, they have a full-size tabernacle model, and you listen to those kids. I just learned so much, and I felt this and that. If we can have a physical model, I mean, I have an engineer who has reviewed some of this in guys in Colorado, and so James actually he owns an engineering company, but this is something I need to get money to have this built. Look at how many people have left the church and aren't interested in building a church, and I'm not interested in building a church either. But this is the only thing in the Bible that it says build this and build it this way. The only thing of thus saith the Lord, this is what I want you to build. Now we'll build a church instead, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this idea that the law has been done away with. Well, as we're trying to return to the Torah, we're trying to say, well, I'm going to keep kosher, I'm going to keep the Sabbath and all the feasts and all these other, all the other people say the 613. Well, the 613 is a farce because they exclude practically all the tabernacle commandments from the 613 commandments. I mean, when I figured that out, I was like, oh wow, that's something else. That why would they not include it? And so they basically, in translation, they morph it to say, build a sanctuary for me, instead of build the dwelling place, build the Mishkan. So people's minds about their impression of this tabernacle, unfortunately, I'm convinced anyway, are locked in to the same irrelevance that is ascribed to the tabernacle. When I say tabernacle, that's from Latin, taberna, and taberna is where we get our English word tavern from. So it's for people drinking too much.
You've given us quite a lot to think about, and you've got a lot of plans and goals, and you've allowed the listener to know where they can help you, how they can help you. We've got your website down here underneath where they can get one of these awesome books. I highly recommend it. Out of my whole library, this is one of the books that I really one of the few I really have a lot of fun with. But there's also, like you said, the power presentation and the workbook. I've played around with a power presentation, and as a person who's not a fan of power presentation, I found it actually really enjoyable. And I was really surprised by that because power presentation is just not my thing. I think I'm a little jaded from grade school projects and things when it first came out, was right before high school, and so I've got a little bit of jadedness towards power presentation, but I really enjoyed it. I went through it and it was great. But I highly recommend the book. It's awesome book. If you don't have it, go check it out. Was there anything else that you wanted to get in there, Chad? Or
yeah, I wanted to emphasize this point. Andrew had mentioned this to me previously in our conversation, and this is one that struck when he mentioned this struck a chord with me, and he mentioned it here again towards the end here, is get involved. There are a lot of things to be passionate for, to support. Many of them are very good, but I know that we have people who are construction orientated in their upbringing as a skill. It's something that they can relate to. There are those who are like Andrew, of an engineering or mechanical engineering mindset and background. So these kind of things are more relatable to you. Youth folks like this have often come to church and they listen to the gifts that are often mentioned at church, and they think, man, none of these things really fit my skill set. Nothing that really excites me either. Not that they aren't good. It's just the way they're built. It's not exciting to them. Brothers and sisters of that mindset, this is something that you can do. It's something that will most likely excite you. You can wrap your arms and your skills that you've been given around something like this. You can put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, in this kind of giving with joy, right? I mean, he says to give with joy, and you've maybe perhaps struggled in giving with joy at some of the other things because it's not something you can relate to as easily. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's just not the way you were made and how you can relate. We are made specifically by our Father for certain tasks. Andrew Hoy's task here, I am sure, for many of you who are like him, of this one, can get excited about this. Andrew is wanting people who can not just physically support, like he mentioned, he's looking for places who can help him outsource some of the stuff. He can't do it himself. It is a greater task than one man. And if you are a serious Bible student, a serious Bible scholar, Torah follower, and you want to help, this is something that you could do. He's looking for serious inquiries only, as you see common now in many of of sales pitches that are out there, right? Serious inquiries only. Andrew is looking for serious people who want to take on a serious task to help see this vision come to life, both for the model and the reality. Later you got to start somewhere. The model would be first. So help him, reach out to him, go to his website. It's real easy. He has a contact. It's up there on the upper right-hand side of the website. Click on that contact form. You can put in, give, your brief information and brief description. Hey, this is really interesting me about this. I may know some people who can do this, who can help us. I know a fabrication shop. I know somebody who works in a mechanical shop, has all the tools that would be needed to fabricate some of these things and could do it quickly. They're gifted in this. Reach out to Andrew through that website and do that. And I please encourage to pray for Andrew. This is something that is near and dear to my heart and something that drives me. Pray for the man. We are all facing obstacles. If none of those things are things that you can help with or not something you can get involved with, the very least we can do is encourage our brother to take down those spiritual entities and places and men and women who would try to interfere with the work that Andrew is trying to accomplish for our Father. So with that being said, I'm going to let Ian say any last things. Andrew, you can say any last things here before we close out for the night.
No, my last thing is I'm really glad you emphasized that, Chad, is that
let me just jump in with before I forget some of the stuff that Chad is mentioning. I've had a number of occasions. It takes a lot of time to get people up to speed, would be volunteers and everything like that. So when Chad is saying serious inquiries only, that's an important thing. But getting involved, sharing, there's and he mentioned the contact form, testimonies, that sort of thing. Engaging other people on this and with this, and educating yourself. That's kind of a first step, because if you have no conviction, you're blown over like in a small wind. And whenever I present this, I get a 95% reception, like, oh wow, yeah, that must be. But the retention rate is probably about 15%, where people are like, yeah, I remember how that went, and yeah, where they actually start having a command level of knowledge. You buy this book, you can trump your pastor, you can trump your small group leaders, your rabbis, and your priests, your pastors, whatever. I mean, there's so little known about this because so few have cared about it. And so I guess with that, I'll back to Ian. But
thank you, Andrew.
I agree that this information should definitely be shared, and that's a solid point. That how can you share information that you yourself don't fully comprehend or understand, and if you're not able to appreciate it, and that's really the thing, right? Is the more you appreciate it, the more you're going to comprehend. And you may not know the details, you might not be an engineer, but at the very least, you can say, well, look, this is what I know, and this is why, and then you can refer them to the information if they want more details, which your book is more than thoroughly well written and full of. But the one thing I just wanted to emphasize before I get off is that you look at the model here that Andrew is proposing, that I completely believe and agree with, and you can look at all the other models and designs, and like Chad said, which one looks like God instructed? I mean, do we really need God to give the instructions for a rectangular structure that looks like man would have relied on his own understanding to build? And then you look at this, what is it, 60-foot dome, right, Andrew? I mean, I'm just leaving it at that. This is a really cool topic. I hope the listener is intrigued. I hope they go to look into it. I hope they research it for themselves, and I strongly suggest getting the book.
Well, current events, I just touching on that as well, and the importance and for such a time as this, why has this been buried as long as it has been? I don't totally have the answer to that, but if we're in the midst of the awakening, the lost tribes, think about all the parallels between what's gone on in current events and the Egyptian Exodus. Let my people go. There's this story about this Pharaoh who said, you can't go to the feast. Right now we have Pharaoh saying you can't go to the church, you can't go to the small groups, and all this. So it's a very interesting historical corollary, and mentioning the idea of the what are people afraid of? There's the mention of the plagues of Egypt. Well, if you look at the number of times the word deber in Hebrew is it's translated as speech. This is where Deuteronomy, Devarim, comes from. It's that same root word, and you go trace through all those occurrences of deber in the Tanakh, and you'll see that sometimes they translate it as speech or speak. Sometimes they'll translate it as word or thing, and sometimes they translate it as plague or pestilence. Okay, so isn't it ironic right now we have everyone afraid of words, afraid of this? Is it really the plague that we're afraid of, or is it these other things, these words? And ignorance of these words is where people are at right now. And so if we're on the cusp of second Exodus, I'm inclined to believe that a full-size tabernacle is part. So think of being able to get in on this at the ground level, if you will. And that's I'll leave the rest of you there.
That's perfect, Andrew. I just wanted to add one more thing. I said if you are that built that way, but in addition to that, maybe you have a husband, a brother, or a spouse, or someone else who has always seemed less interested in church because it didn't fit them. Maybe Andrew's book and work here, because they're a mechanic or mechanically inclined or engineering minded, they've rejected the scripture long ago. Maybe this is something that you can put in their hands that's going to allow them to connect to their Father in heaven. This is going to be something that will affirm them and root them into the scripture, a door to the tabernacle, the true tabernacle of heaven for them. So maybe it's for someone else that you know as well. Andrew, I know that we didn't get to cover everything that you want to talk about. That's generally the way it is when you have a book that's so detailed and full of information. We're just simply not going to get to everything that we want to talk about. But I so enjoyed having you on. I want to encourage, again, people to go to your website. He does have other interviews that are upcoming. I encourage everyone to go listen to them. Again, not every interviewer is going to ask the same questions or put it in the same manner that allows Andrew to answer it in a way that gives you more information than what you got here. Andrew, thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience with us. I know that we wanted to do this a long time ago. My schedule interfered, out of my control. Nothing I could do about that. But you were patient and gracious, and still allowing for us to bring you on and talk about this with your time. I don't take that lightly. And it's nice having a friend like you with a passion and a heart like yours. So from Disputed Lands and Take on the World TV, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you. And the Isaiah quote, zeal for my house will consume me, right? I want to leave you with that. So
that's a good one.
Folks, it's been Monday night. You all have been great. My name is Chad Schaefer. Co-host is Ian the Duck Fiaducci. Thanks once again for stopping by, and we will see you again next week. Shalom.
Shalom.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry.